West Ham will not be sacking manager David Moyes, and he will be here next weekend as the Hammers face Everton at the London Stadium. That's according to Sean Whetstone and ex-West Ham employee, two really reliable sources when it comes to West Ham news. Very similar updates last night, although I think the tone is starting to change a little bit. But essentially the update was there was no board meeting last night after the defeat at the Molineux. There's no West Ham board meeting planned for this week, and David Moyes will have the Everton game. Now that's where I want to start, because I think a few weeks ago, after the Arsenal defeat, the Brentford defeat, the updates we got were David Moyes is our manager. The board support David Moyes. The board back David Moyes. There's no plans to sack Moyes whatsoever. And if they did sack David Moyes is exactly who they would go and appoint to turn things round. The board were backing David Moyes, and that is that. But I do feel like it's changing a little bit now. I feel like it's Moyes has got the Everton game. Singular. One game. Perhaps if we fail to win that one, he will be dismissed. We'll have to wait and see. But at the minute, the update is Moyes is going nowhere, and he's got the Everton game. Sean Whetstone used the phrase Moyes is on thin ice. Not something we've heard before. That would suggest he's close to being sacked. We've not had that update from a reliable source until last night. It comes as no surprise. Last night I was really frustrated. I was disappointed with the performance. I was disappointed with the result at the Molineux. Although it came as no surprise, I was still disappointed. But I was really frustrated last night because I knew, or I felt, the board would not sack David Moyes off the back of yesterday, and he would still have the Everton game next weekend. Now that may still prove to be incorrect. He may get sacked today. Tomorrow we may get an update that David Moyes has been let go from his services. Although I would be very surprised, because I don't trust the board. The board have done a lot of good in the last couple of years. Don't get me wrong, they've changed a lot from 5-6 years ago. They've changed a lot. They've adapted their media presence, etc, etc. They've tried to put in an infrastructure within the club. Whether it's a good one, whether it's working, that's up for a debate. That's a completely different story. The scouting team, the recruitment analysis team, but they're trying to put in an infrastructure. They've obviously stuck by David Moyes. They've given a lot of money to spend in the summer as well. So they've done a lot of things right, the board. They have changed their behaviours. But that doesn't mean I trust them in the appointment of a manager, whether to sack the manager or whether to appoint the correct replacement for the manager. I don't trust them. When I look over their tenure so far, they've got a couple right, but then usually those managers outstay their welcome because they don't pull the trigger. Now that is, I guess, a compliment to the board to some extent because they stick by their managers, but that's why I don't trust them to make the right decision on David Moyes at the right time. Perhaps more importantly, I don't trust them to get the replacement for David Moyes correct. And I think this is part of the worry, because within those updates we received last night, we got told there's no replacement lined up. So if the board did sack David Moyes today, they don't know who they'd go get. There's no replacement lined up. There's nobody to come in. So who would be in charge for Everton next weekend? Hypothetically, Moyes left today. They don't know. And this is really, really worrying. And this is why I just can't trust them. Now, in an ideal world, we'd always have a succession plan. Brighton's the perfect model for this. They knew exactly who they wanted. If Potter left, we're going to go get him. It might have changed over the years as well while Potter's been there, but the succession plan, the shortlist, has always been something they've had in consideration. In an ideal world, West Ham would have done the same. Even when we're finishing 6th and 7th in the Premier League, it's a case of, okay, but we need to make sure we've got that list of managers that we'll go get if David Moyes was to walk out tomorrow. We knew that was never going to happen. Like I said, that's ideal. It ain't happening. But worst case scenario, you'd have liked to have thought during that World Cup break, when they decided, no, we're going to stick with Moyes, we're not going to take this opportunity, this 6-week opportunity to change the manager. We're not going to take it. We're going to stick with Moyes. Like I said, didn't agree with it, but fine. You would have liked to have thought they would have at least said, right, we're going to have to start drawing up our shortlist of managers now. Because if Moyes fails to turn it round after the restart of domestic football, we're going to have to act. We're going to have to act quickly. And that is dismissing him and getting in a replacement. We need to know who we want. And I was praying during that World Cup break, you'll know this from the videos, that they were at least doing something, which is him. That's who we want. It doesn't appear so. 2 months later, it's gone from the middle of November to the middle of January, 2 months later, and we still don't have that list. And that's after losing 3 of our 5 games since we've come back from the World Cup. It is incredibly concerning. This can't help me think and worry that part of the reason David Moyes is getting that Everton game is because they don't know who they want. And that would suggest that, no, I don't think it's the main reason. I think the main reason that Moyes is getting the Everton game is because I think the board do think Moyes will turn it round. Obviously, I completely disagree. Whether you look at the short-term form, 1 point from 21 in our last 7 Premier League games. Whether you look at the medium form, which is this season, 19 games, 15 points after 19 games. We're in the bottom 3. Whether you look at our long-term form, which is all the way back to the start of last year, the calendar year, it all points to one thing, which is relegation. All of it. It doesn't matter how you look at it, what prism you want to look at it through. It all suggests the same thing. But I think the main reason that Moyes has got the Everton game is because I do think the board think he will turn it round. But the worrying thing is, part of me does wonder, Moyes is getting that job because they just don't know who they'd go get. They're just kicking the can down the road a little bit. And it's almost like Moyes is getting the Everton job because of not what Moyes can do, but because of what Moyes has done, which is 7th and 6th finishes in the Premier League, and also because they don't know who they'd bring in to replace David Moyes. It is incredibly concerning right now. There comes opportunities in the Premier League when it's the best time to sack your manager, and it might differ from club to club. Like I said, that 6-week break was the perfect one for every club in the Premier League. You're going to change your manager, that's the time to do it. But after that, it might come down to the transfer window, it might come down to a run of fixtures. You might think, okay, those 5 games on paper are winnable, so let's change our manager before it. So when the new guy comes in, he's actually got 5 games where he could pick up points from. Let's give him the best start possible as manager. That is obviously what changes from team to team. But right now, after that 6-week break, I felt the best time to sack Moyes, if we were going to do it, was before the FA Cup game against Brentford. That if we sacked him then, the new manager would have the FA Cup game to have a look at the players, and then we'd get straight back into Premier League football. And hopefully from there, we could go at it. But we didn't take that one. I feel that this is the next best opportunity, and it's because of the transfer window. And I think it's incredibly dangerous, actually, to give David Moyes the Everton game. Because what if we win? What happens if we win that match? Well, we know what happens. He's now here for the Newcastle game. I know we play Derby. Forget that. That game doesn't matter. Like I said before, I felt that it was almost like a win-win for David Moyes going into that Brentford game. Either we won the match, happy days, tick for David Moyes. We lose, don't worry about it, Dave. FA Cup don't matter. Move along. I felt like it almost didn't count. If he won, it does count, and if we went out, it didn't count. And I feel like that against Derby as well. We were to beat Derby. There you go, tick for David Moyes. If Derby put us out, don't worry about it. FA Cup, don't care. Newcastle's more important. Let's move along, kind of thing. That Newcastle game's outside the January transfer window. If we beat Everton, the January transfer window's gone for the new manager. In my opinion, if we beat Everton next week, that's it. Moyes has got the whole January transfer window, and I think that is an incredibly dangerous thing to do. Now, obviously, there's the situation that Moyes has the Everton game, doesn't win, and gets sacked. But even then, you're only giving the new manager 9 days at best to come in, evaluate the squad a little bit. Now, obviously, like I said, ideal world, the new manager's already evaluating the squad, but that would mean the board has contacted that manager already, indirectly, of course, just to say, hey, Gaffer's under pressure, we might fancy recruiting you, so keep an eye on West Ham, will you have a little look? Because Moyes did it. When Moyes came in after Pellegrini, he basically said, I've been watching the last 8 games. Moyes knew he was going to get that job after Pellegrini, and he started evaluating the squad from a distance. But this, right now, we've got the January transfer window, we've got 2 weeks, which is a long time. There's plenty of time for somebody to come in and start making changes to the squad. And you want to give the new manager, should there be one, as much opportunity and a fair crack as possible. And I do think a large part of that would be the ability to sell 1 or 2 players and bring in 2 or 3 of his own players as well. Bring in players that he wants to work with. So while 90% of the squad will be David Moyes' squad. At least 10% of it is his. Whereas if we have to wait until after the January transfer window, there's absolutely no room for manoeuvre. There's no new players arriving or anything. And I think you're almost starting... I think you become less appealing as well. I think right now, if we were to sack Moyes, we'd be the only Premier League club looking for a manager. And I do think, at the minute, it's still a decent gig. There's only 20 jobs in the Premier League. We are a big club. We've got a good squad there. I believe so. I believe we've still got a good squad. I think a lot of managers would look at that team that we've got and think, you know what, I can work with that. I can work with that player, that player, that. I can get West Ham out of this. Just like David Moyes did. Just like David Moyes did after Slaven Bilic, and just like David Moyes did after Manuel Pellegrini. He looked at the squad and thought, yeah, I can keep that team in the Premier League. There'll be plenty of managers doing it right now with Moyes' squad. They'll be looking and going, I don't know how you're struggling with that, because I could get that team up and running and keep them up, no problem. So this club, this position would be attractive for a lot of managers. You won't change my mind on that. Would it be the ones we want? Possibly not. But I do think a lot of managers would love this gig at West Ham, because if they got relegated, it would be seen as Moyes' fault. Well, we were in the bottom three when I took over, nothing to do with me. I did my best, didn't keep them up, but Moyes' fault, not mine. But the more games you leave it, the less appealing it gets to those managers. Like I said, World Cup period, if we dismiss Moyes then, there would be more managers then wanting to take the West Ham job than there is today. It might not be many. It might only be a handful. But there will be some managers that have changed their mind. I don't fancy that, actually. You've dropped down the table a little bit. A couple of those fixtures were quite winnable. Well, you've lost them. You gave them to Moyes. I don't fancy this anymore. We don't know. But I do think the January transfer window is part of that appeal to some of them. But also, Everton and Bournemouth. It is possible that in the next week, Everton and Bournemouth will be seeking new managers as well. Now, hopefully, not the case for the Toffees. Hopefully Lampard is still here next week. We don't want the whole, typical scenario, which is Everton sack Lampard, go get somebody, and their first game in charge is at the London Stadium, because we all know what's going to happen then, don't we? So let's pray Lampard is still here. And that's why I think it's dangerous, because I think if Moyes and Lampard were to remain for next weekend, now I've not seen the Everton game back yet, I'll do that during the week. But bear in mind that Southampton have just beat them. You'd almost fancy us to beat Everton. I do. I might change my mind, but right now I think, I think we could beat that Everton team next week despite everything. And that's why it worries me a little bit, because it's just a stay of execution for David Moyes. But anyway, back to my original point that I was trying to make 5 minutes ago. Apologies. I'm calmer today. I'm more chatty today. Last night I was really worked up, really emotional last night. So today I'm a lot more calmer, a lot more chattier. It's dangerous. Bournemouth and Everton might be in the market for a manager soon as well. Now, I know you'll say, well, surely West Ham are more appealing than those two clubs. I don't necessarily disagree. I think Everton fans will think we're more appealing than West Ham, and I think they'd be right to think that as well. But the point is, A, we'd be in the market at potentially the same time as them, so we're 3 clubs going for the same managers. Or B, possibly worse, which is they might move before us. Like I said, it's feasible that before the Everton game, Everton have got a new manager. They might go get the manager that we're possibly looking at. I mean, supposedly we're not looking at anyone. But I think I'm still convinced that if we were to sack Moyes, Sean Dyche would be the one we go for. I am convinced by it. I think it's because he's free. I think that's a large part of it. I think he did quite well at Burnley. Cadbury's a big fan of him. I just think there's a lot of reasons that Sean Dyche would be the manager they went for. And it might not be a long-term job. It might only be a 6-month contract. Keep us up. Similar to what Moyes had. Keep us up, then we'll have a look at it in the summer and you'll get the job on a longer-term basis then. It might be something like that. But I'm convinced it'll be Dyche. But Dyche is also the favourite for the Everton job. So it's possible that, Everton go get him and we're sat there going, oh, hang on a minute. That's the guy we were going to go get. I just think at the minute, this is the right opportunity. And I'm shifting my frustration. It's a bit like the Thomas Souček thing. Before, a year ago, I was frustrated that Souček was starting games. But then I stopped blaming Souček. And I started blaming Moyes. It was his fault. He's the one that keeps including him. He doesn't have to play him every week, but he does. And if Souček had a poor game, I thought, well, he's had a poor game. I'm not really that frustrated with him. I am to some extent, but it's more with the manager for including him every single week. And I'm getting a bit like that now. Yes, Moyes can resign, but he's not going to do it. There's too much money for him to give up. And also, he's got his colleagues there. He's got his backroom staff. Moyes walks, is putting pressure on them to walk as well. And they're also on lesser salary than him, so on and so forth. So it's almost like, well, we're digging our heels. But I also do believe, by the way, I believe that Moyes thinks he can turn this round. I don't believe that, and a majority of you don't believe that, but I do think Moyes believes he can turn this round. Listening to him after the game last night about how we were unlucky, we deserved something, that's no surprise. We all knew he was going to say that. But I do think Moyes believes he can turn this round, so he's not going to walk. But that's why I'm now looking at the board thinking, well, this is down to you now. Yes, he's not doing a good enough job. Yes, we're in the bottom three. But you've had plenty warning that this was happening. The board have allowed us to sleepwalk into the bottom three. The board are allowing us to sleepwalk towards relegation at the minute. So while I have my frustrations and disappointments with David Moyes currently, I have more with the board. Because it's a case of, well, you need to act now. He's not doing a good enough job, but you're the one that's left him there. And also, if he is your manager, then back him. Listen, this is where I put what I think of David Moyes to one side completely. And I always say it, and I always will. Either back or sack your manager. And keeping him in a job is not the same. Not sacking David Moyes is not backing David Moyes. That's just not sacking David Moyes. Backing David Moyes is going and getting 2 or 3 players in the January transfer window to help him out. They could have gone and got 1 or 2 players in the first 2 weeks of the January transfer window that could have been here, that could have been playing yesterday against Wolves. But we haven't got that. Poor planning, and it's incompetent at the board level. Like I said, they've done a lot right. They've had a lot of credit in the last couple of seasons. In the summer, with the big spend up. But right now, what they're doing is not good enough for West Ham, and to some extent for David Moyes either. But anyway, there you go. So that's the news that David Moyes will not be sacked as West Ham manager, and he will be here for the Everton game. However, it's getting singular. He's got the Everton game. And I think it's dangerous. I think it's a really, really dangerous thing for this board to do. But if you've enjoyed this video somehow, please do drop a like on it. And subscribe if you're new to the channel as well. And I shall catch up with you tomorrow. See you tomorrow.